皆様、本日はお忙しい中お集まりいただきありがとうございます。代表を引退しようと決意しました。
And just like that, seemingly out of nowhere, one of badminton's greatest players called it a day. To say this had an impact on the badminton world would be the understatement of the century. Kento Momota was one of badminton's most beloved players, with millions of fans worldwide, with multiple fan clubs. Upon this news, the tributes and posts from everyone flooded in, from fans to the world's best players to even myself. I'm sure I'm not alone when I say I was sad when I heard of Momota's announcement. It left me with a sort of hollow feeling, likely caused by the knowledge that I'll never get to see him play again. It happens whenever a top professional retires, especially when it's one of the world's best. But in Kento Momota's case, that feeling was magnified, because his career, although filled with absolutely fantastic moments, tremendous highs, was accompanied by horrific lows. Lows which have left everyone with a huge number of what-ifs and what could-have-beens. What-ifs and what could-have-beens that to understand you must know Momota's entire story. The story I intend to tell you today. So grab your popcorn and drink, because as you can tell by the runtime, this isn't a quick one. But I promise you, it'll be worth the watch. We start this story in 2010. Japan was starting to show signs of becoming the badminton giant we know them to be today. Their female players had started to show signs of their strength a few years before, but it was at this point when their male players started to catch up, with two huge results emphasising this. At the All England, badminton's oldest and most prestigious event, Kenichi Tago stunned the world by reaching the final, becoming the first Japanese men's singles player to ever do so. And then, later in the year, Japan showed there was more to their male talents than just one player when they won their first ever Thomas Cup medal, a bronze. Amidst that team was the aforementioned Kenichi Tago, as well as other strong singles players like Sho Sasaki and future men's doubles legends Hiroyuki Endo and Kenichi Hayakawa. But whilst these stars were starting to shine bright for the Japanese senior team, amongst their junior ranks, the player who would elevate Japanese badminton was taking his first steps. Now, Kento Momota's start to badminton wasn't as mind-blowing as you might expect from a player who would go on to dominate the sport in years to come. At those 2010 World Juniors, Kento Momota lost in the third round, a modest result when you consider he was 2 to 3 years younger than the majority of the other players. However, another player who was the same age as Momota, one you'll hear of a lot in this story, created history by winning the whole thing. Viktor Axelsen. Due to his young age and the fact he had just become the only European player to win the World Junior Boys Singles title, all attention was on Viktor, with pretty much everyone touting him for great things in the future. For most badminton fans, not much attention was paid to anyone else, Momota included. Regardless of this, Kento Momota continued to work hard and develop his game, and by the following year, still aged just 16, he was invited to the national team as a training player. As part of this team, Momota was sent off to Indonesia for a training block, a trip where, in his own words, he would train as a warrior. On this trip, he got to witness Indonesian legend Taufik Hidayat train up close. Watching the former world and Olympic champion training right in front of his eyes was awe-inspiring. But sadly for Momota, it was during this trip that something life-changing occurred, something which would go on to shape his future.
This morning on World News Now, breaking news. A violent earthquake off Japan's northeast coast has rocked the nation.
A tsunami warning is in effect for a large part of that country as well as other nations as well. Waves could top 30 feet or more.
On March 11th, 2011, at just after 2:45 in the afternoon, a humongous 9.1 on the Richter scale earthquake struck off the east coast of Honshu. The tremors and subsequent tsunami devastated the area, killing 19,759 people and injuring thousands more. On top of this, the tsunami struck the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant, eventually disabling it, causing national and international alarm. For Kento Momota, this was a confusing time, not just because this natural disaster had happened in Japan, but that Fukushima was Momota's hometown. Being so far away from his loved ones at such a time was difficult for Momota, unable to get through to anyone until midnight because of all the chaos and destruction. This made him not only worry, but lonely in his room in Indonesia. This disaster was something that would stay with Momota for the remainder of his career, using it as a constant source of inspiration, often saying that he wishes to achieve better and better results as to always bring light to his school, his people, and his hometown community. And it wouldn't take long for Momota to bring back his first piece of success, as at that year's Asian Junior Championships and World Junior Championships, he came away with bronze. It was results like these, combined with a good showing at that year's All Japan Championships where he reached the quarterfinals, that meant he was asked to join the national team for the 2012 season. In 2012, Kento Momota was in his final year as a junior player, and with the World Junior Championships that year to be held in Japan, he was very eager to clinch gold. But that wouldn't be easy, as Victor Axelsen, the 2010 champion, and a player who had just reached the final of the French Super Series, was set to compete. But surprisingly, Victor lost in his semi-finals to Zhu Song of China, opening the door for Kento Momota. This was a historic moment for Japanese badminton, as Kento Momota became the first Japanese player to win the World Junior Boys Singles title. However, this wasn't the only first that Momota created at those championships, as he also helped the Japanese team reach their first ever World Junior Mixed Team Final, where they won the silver. This success at the World Juniors, coupled with the Asia Junior Gold he won early in the year, plus yet another solid showing at the All Japan Championships in December, it meant that Momota was given a spot on the Japanese A-team, a position that would mean he could be sent to the world's biggest tournaments. But before he could do that, he first had to get his ranking up. January 1st, 2013, Kento Momota was ranked at number 90 in the world. But he wouldn't stay there for too long, as right at the beginning of 2013, Kento Momota won 3 consecutive European Badminton Union tournaments in Estonia, Sweden and Austria. Kenichi Tago did it before, also racking up a few titles, and now Kento Momota was doing the same. With these tournament wins and a few of the results, it meant that by April, Momota had already climbed 44 places to number 46 in the world. His ascension of the world rankings, however, would not stop there. With more solid results and wins over some established players like Hu Yun and Tomi Sugiyato, Momota quickly established himself as a top 32 player, meaning he would now consistently be in the main draw of the top tier of tournaments, which at the time were the Super Series and Super Series Premier. Considering Momota was vastly inexperienced at this level, he still made a great impression, reaching the quarterfinals of the Singapore Open Super Series and the China Masters Super Series, and he also reached the semi-finals of the China Open Super Series Premier. All of this meant that by the end of 2013, Kento Momota was ranked 17 in the world. In just 12 months he had gone from world number 90 to world number 17. He had won 3 titles, reached the quarters of 2 Super Series events, the semis of a Super Series Premier event, and had pushed and beaten a number of the world's best. That is, by all means, an incredibly solid year, but it must be said that Kento Momota hadn't yet caught the attention of the wider badminton community. For that to happen, he would need to do something more extraordinary. And, well, that was about to happen.
Japan are in the Thomas Cup final for the very first time. Kento Momota is one of their heroes.
2014 was the year that everyone stood up and took notice of Kento Momota and saw the potential that he had. That was certainly the case for me. Every year for as long as I can remember, I have made the journey to Birmingham for the All England Championships. 2014 was no different. As I sat in the arena on the 3rd day of play, soaking in the second round matches, I heard this match called to court.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome onto court number 1 in the men's singles, from England, Rajiv Usev, and from Japan, Kento Momota.
This match piqued my interest, not just because I was teammates with Raj at the time, but because I'd heard a few things about this young Japanese player. I hadn't seen much of him before, badminton on YouTube wasn't as good as it is now, but what I had heard was that he was an incredibly skillful player, with most saying he was a future superstar. So there I sat, excited to see it all unfold, thinking that it could be a great match. Kento Momota may have been this potential superstar, but Raj had experience, was also a fantastic player, and had the crowd on his side. Well, in almost no time at all, Kento Momota didn't just silence the crowd, but displayed everything that I had previously heard about, and then some. His movement was smooth as butter, his defence was solid, and his net playing control was unbelievable. But what really stood out to me was not his badminton skills, not his fluid footwork, it was something else. His confidence and composure. It just never faltered. It was as if he was a player with 10 years of senior experience, not less than 1. I'm not exaggerating when I say it blew me away, and it's for that reason that what happened just 2 months later, well, it didn't surprise me at all.
Down the middle. Down the middle. Down the middle.
Japan have rewritten the record books. A fourth country's name will be engraved on the Thomas Cup trophy.
This Thomas Cup win was a huge deal. In winning it, Japan had become only the 4th nation in the tournament's 65-year history to win. The win truly cemented Japan's giant badminton nation status that I said they had started to exert 4 years previously. For Kento Momota, well, he was one of the key players in this victory. Playing at second singles, he didn't lose a match, winning 5 from 5, with impressive wins in the group stages over Nan Wei of Hong Kong and his fast-becoming rival Victor Axelsen of Denmark. In the semi-finals, he sealed an unbelievable 3-0 win over China by defeating 2013 world bronze medalist Du Pengyu. And in the final, he defeated Chong Wei Feng of Malaysia in straight games. At just 19 years old, under the most immense pressure, Kento Momota delivered multiple cool, calm and collected performances. It really was a sight to be seen. Japan received a lot of recognition for this historic win, and rightfully so. Each and every member of the team played a role. In each match it seemed to be someone else who stepped up and delivered a crucial win, and it was all backed up by their contagious enthusiasm, singing and dancing between every point. But amongst all of this, it was Kento Momota who stole the show. He was the player who garnered the most attention, and as a result, everyone was excited to see what he would do next. "2014 had been a year of great success in the team environment for Kento Momota, something which he continued into 2015 as he played a major role in Japan reaching the final of the Sudman Cup, the World Mixed Team Championships. This was yet another huge step for Japan as this was the first time they had ever achieved such a feat. But whilst Kento Momota was having all this team success, he had yet to have any huge individual success. Yes, he had reached a couple of quarterfinals and semi-finals at big tournaments, but he hadn't had that true breakthrough. Well, in 2015 that was about to change, and change in a big way.
He's done it! Unbelievable turnaround!
On April 12, 2015, Kento Momota not only achieved a first for himself, but also for his country, as he became the first winner of a Super Series men's singles title, once again surpassing his predecessor Kenichi Tago, who had fallen short on just so many occasions. This fact alone is enough to make this a historic victory, but that would only be telling half the story, because it was the manner in which he won that showed a lot about Momota and his character. His opponent was Hu Yun, a player who's the definition of a hot and cold player. Brilliant one week, not so the next. The kind of player that is incredibly tricky to play. And in this match, having lost the opening game and not really getting into it, Hu Yun started to warm up. He started to play the kind of badminton which was at times almost impossible to play against.
There's the winning smash.
With the second game under his belt, a lead in the third, and no signs of him losing this hot streak,
We'll take it. Oh my goodness me!
if you were a betting man, you place your money on Hu Yun, especially when also considering Momota's age and lack of experience in individual finals. But Momota isn't like normal players, and managed to compose himself and inch his way back into the match.
Oh, he's got it back. Oh, it was getting long, surely. What a rally!
As a result, he not only levelled the scores, but he also managed to kill Hu Yun's momentum and then eventually run away as winner. This was the definition of a champion's performance, and to do so at just 20 years old was remarkable. At the time we didn't know it, but this was the sort of performance we would see many times over with Momota. But back to 2015 and Kento Momota was far from done. In June at the Indonesia Open, Kento Momota added a Super Series Premier title to his resume, with another very mature final winning performance. Then in August he returned to the same venue, the Istora Senayan, and won a bronze at the World Championships. Then, right at the end of the year at the Super Series Finals, he won his third title of the year, defeating a very familiar name, Viktor Axelsen. It really did seem at this point that both Kento Momota and Viktor Axelsen could create a similar rivalry to that of Lin Dan and Lee Chong-wei. Like those two legends, they were right and left-handed, had opposing playing styles, and seemed to have opposing personalities too. And they also had the similarity that they were both clear future world number ones. What made it extra exciting is that they seemed to be following each other in achievements. Viktor had won his first world medal, also a bronze in 2014, and Kento matched it 1 year later. Momota won the 2015 Super Series Finals, and 1 year later Viktor would go on to win that too. There are others, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. But whilst there was this buzz around these two creating a bit of a rivalry, it was beginning to seem as though Momota was pushing ahead, especially given that following those 2015 Super Series Finals, Momota now had a 4-1 head-to-head record. This aside, 2015 was the breakthrough year for Momota, winning 3 big titles, winning a world bronze, and breaking the top 4 in the world. Everything was looking very positive. And following his win at the India Super Series at the end of March 2016, there was a real buzz about Kento Momota and his chance at the Rio Olympics. It was news that sent shockwaves around Japan. Both Kenichi Tago and Kento Momota had admitted to gambling, a crime that is punishable with a prison sentence of up to 3 years. Fortunately for both players, prison time was spared, but for Kento Momota and his dreams of playing the Rio Olympics, well, that was deemed probably impossible by the Nippon Badminton Association Secretary General Kinji Zeniya. This, as you can likely guess, was devastating for Kento Momota. His world had just collapsed around him. Not only was his Olympic dream dashed, not only was he unsure if he would ever play badminton again, but he was vilified in the press, completely shunned. To Momota, it was the darkest period of my life. But with the help of his family and NTT East, Momota was able to slowly overcome this and make positive changes. Rather than sit back and do nothing, Momota decided to focus energy on training, improving his skills, and also helping the younger players at his club. Even though he was unsure whether he would ever get to play internationally again, for Momota, his love for the sport never dulled. With all of this, plus his behaviour, community service, his job performance at NTT East, and genuine remorse for his actions, the Nippon Badminton Association's board decided in March of 2017 to lift Momota's ban. From May of that year, Kento Momota could return to competitive badminton. For Momota to return to the courts and showcase his badminton, a sport he truly loved, was clearly an emotional moment. Now it was time to return to international badminton, something which on the surface sounds straightforward, but it wasn't. To you watching, you might think that for Kento Momota to come back would be rather easy. His ban had been lifted, he had even played an internal tournament and won, so surely he could simply start entering international tournaments and go from there. Well, not quite. Because in Japan, to be able to enter international tournaments, you must first be a member of the national team. And to be a member of the national team, you must achieve certain results at the All Japan Badminton Championships, which are held annually in December. With Momota still serving his ban during the 2016 All Japan Championships, he was of course not able to qualify for the national team. So it seemed like Momota's international comeback would have to wait until 2018. But that Japanese ranking event he won in May possibly presented him with a lifeline. Maybe the NBA would make an exception and select Momota as a national team member based on that result. Well, that didn't happen, but luckily for Momota there was a compromise made. Momota could play in international events, but he would have to self-fund everything. And with that, ranked 282 in the world, Momota set off for the Canada Open. He was determined to not just get back to where he was, but surpass it.
And from Japan, Kento Momota!
And that's it. That's game.
The silver medal is presented to Kento Momota from Japan.
Good length, the lift from Momota. Oh, terrible backhand. In the end, what a patient rally from Momota. His road back to the world's top 10.
Game.
Only needed the one opportunity. 21-16, 21-10, the margin of his victory. But this man, this week, quite simply has been too good. Kento Momota. His fifth title of the year and his sixth final. But his previous titles, international series and international challenger events. For a lot of fans around the world that will be delighted to see Momota back on the big stage.
By the time Momota had left Macau in November of 2017, he had climbed an incredibly impressive 234 places to number 48 in the world. Momota had won 5 titles from 6 tournaments played, and it was with this sort of form that even though Kento Momota failed to reach the final 4 at the All Japan Championships, the requirement to make the A-team, the NBA made an exception and put Momota into the A-team. Kento Momota was most certainly back, but the question now was, can he be better than he was before? Can Kento Momota be better than he was before? That was the question that everyone wondered. It was certainly the question that I had in my mind going into 2018. Fortunately for everyone, it wouldn't take long for us to get an answer. Unable to play in the All England due to his ranking being too low, the first tournament Momota would play in where the top stars were competing was the Asia Championships at the end of April. At this tournament were all the top stars of Asian badminton, including 3 players Kento Momota had never beaten before. 2-time Olympic champion Lin Dan, reigning Olympic champion Chen Long, and a player Momota especially looked up to, Lee Chong-wei. If there ever was a test to truly see Kento Momota's post-ban level, then this was it. Could Kento Momota be better than he was before? Well, those two matches well and truly answered that. But if there was any small amount of doubt over this, then at the Thomas Cup a month later, it was crushed. Kento Momota returned to the competition and once again helped Japan reach the final. And although Japan were unable to regain the title, just as he did in 2014, Kento Momota finished undefeated with two significant wins. One of them a second consecutive win over Olympic champion Chen Long, and the other over his at the time rival Victor Axelsen. Both these wins were emphatic. So emphatic that within the space of just two tournaments, the Asia Championships and now the Thomas Cup, Kento Momota seemed to have put himself at the top of men's singles. Kento Momota was clearly back to better than before, everyone could see that. But for Momota himself, he was just so happy to be back playing for Japan, being a part of the team. He even admitted years later that his favourite tournament from 2018 was the Thomas Cup.
トマス杯で、久しぶりに日本代表のみんなと同じチームで試合できて、なおかつ自分の納得するプレーが、できたので、すごくトマスカップは印象に残ってます。
Which is rather incredible when you consider that in 2018 he also achieved this. Once again, Kento Momota had created history, the first Japanese men's singles player to win the World Championships. Undoubtedly a remarkable achievement. But it was during the prize ceremony at those championships that Kento Momota showed a side of himself that wasn't all too known back then, but one that would show itself more and more as his career progressed. Selflessness. As the prize ceremony began and the players walked out to the podium, you can see that Kento Momota is carrying his racket. This is odd because usually players will bring nothing. If they bring anything at all, it would be their country's flag. It left everyone with the obvious question, why? The answer to that question came right after the match in the media zone. This is a racket model, Yonex Astrock 99, that is designed exclusively for me and Chong Wei. I thought about it and brought it to the podium. I feel indebted to Chong Wei himself as he also experienced an 8-month suspension from the doping problem. He sent me a message on September 16th. A person cannot walk a right path 100%. If you make a mistake, notice it, change yourself, become a new strong man, return home. I won against him in the first Asian Championships in April, but my respect is not changed. This really does show you the type of person that Kento Momota is. That World Championships was his moment. A moment everyone would have expected him to enjoy for himself, but instead he decided to share it with another, with Lee Chong Wei, simply because he respects him. And what adds even more weight to this is that just before those World Championships at the Indonesia Open, Kento Momota defeated Lee Chong Wei, a match which ultimately became Chong Wei's last, as he was diagnosed with cancer, cutting his career short. With his lovely, effortless badminton, his respectful attitude, and the way in which he conducted himself, Kento Momota was quickly becoming a fan favourite. But whilst Kento Momota was most certainly feeling all that love from his fans from outside of Japan, he was in doubt as to how he was perceived by his own country. Strange when you consider what he had achieved since coming back, but it wasn't without warranty. When his ban was lifted, not everyone was in favour. He was criticised during his first tournament back in Canada, when the reason for his ban in the first place being really frowned upon by the Japanese people, Momota was worried as to how he would be welcomed when it was time for the 2018 Japan Open. But any worries that he may have had were quickly forgotten as Momota came out to rapturous support. Support that only grew as each round passed, and was magnified when he won the winning point.
Kento Momota takes the Daihatsu Yonex Japan Open.
Kento Momota, through his own hard work and new perspective, had won over the Japanese people, something he acknowledged after the final. Momota had returned to his beloved team, beaten his idols, won the World Championships, and he regained the affections from his nation, and all in time for one more major competition, the Asian Games. With things as they were, everyone expected Kento Momota to claim the crown, but as it transpired, this didn't happen. But in its way, something else emerged, a rivalry for Kento Momota. Like I said, the Asian Games didn't go as Momota would have liked, as in the individual, he didn't even make it to the medal rounds. But it wasn't a complete disaster, as in Momota's favourite type of tournament, the team event, he helped Japan claim a bronze medal, their first Asian Games men's team event medal since 1966. And as a part of that team event, Kento Momota was the only player to take a match off of Indonesia in their semi-final clash. Now, on the surface, that last statement might seem rather odd to make, but it has relevance to this whole section because of who Momota beat, Anthony Ginting. Kento Momota won their encounter in 3 close games, a match which elevated the excitement inside the already crazy Istora Senayan to ungodly levels. Everyone was blown away by what they saw. And then, to everyone's surprise, but treat as well, just 4 days later they had another fantastic match, this time of Ginting exacting revenge. By this point there was already a little buzz about these two and their matches, a possible rivalry unfolding. And watching them, it is clear to see why. The intensity was fantastic, the contrasting styles created beautiful rallies. But maybe this buzz was because it was two already very popular players playing inside badminton's craziest venue, making it more than it was. And also, it was only 2 matches. For a rivalry to be born, there needs to be more than that.
Match point, Ginting.
That 2018 China Open final was an absolutely amazing match. It was a match that was talked about for some time after, and still gets talked about today. And it was for that reason, and also slightly because Ginting did win, that China Open final served as the match that solidified the Kento Momota-Anthony Ginting rivalry. A rivalry which went on to become known as Momogi. Over the next year or so there would be a number of these classic Momogi matches. Matches that were both close and entertaining, pitting the opposing styles against one another. But whilst this rivalry provided excitement at the build-up to any of their matches, and entertainment at the match itself, it also provided Kento Momota with something too. It showed him that if he wished to continue to dominate, to stay as world number 1, he would need to change his style, which, heading into 2019, he did so, with results that had never been seen before. "2019 is a year that has gone down in the history books, quite literally, as by the end of it Kento Momota would be acknowledged by the Guinness World Records for his feat of winning 11 titles in a calendar year. An insanely impressive result, one which will be incredibly difficult to replicate, let alone beat. It is a record that, to many, makes Momota stand out above so many other men's singles players. But whilst the record itself is undoubtedly impressive, what he did in order to achieve it, in my eyes, is more so. Because Kento Momota not only completely changed his game, but he had to go through his most heartbreaking loss of his career so far. To explain, I must first go all the way back to May of 2017. When Kento Momota came back from his ban in 2017, what was most noticeable to me was the physical change he had gone through. He looked completely different, so much fitter and trimmer, physically fit. Before his ban, it wasn't as if he was fat, far from it, but he didn't seem to me like someone who was in peak physical condition. This is something that Momota himself highlighted, attributing it to his lack of focus on proper nutrition.
食べたいものばっか食べてたし、やっぱそういうところから、変えていかないと。
Cleaning up his diet and focusing on physical training, it made a noticeable difference. It was as if he had changed from a boy to a man. During his first comeback tournament at that Japanese ranking event in 2017, I remember being blown away by this fact. He still had all the Momota skills and trademarks that had impressed me so much when I first saw him at the 2014 All England, but he was just a much stronger, faster and fitter version. On top of this, there was one other area Momota had developed, something which was really noticeable when he started playing against the world's best, his tactical decision making. Momota still predominantly used a patient, rallying style, often waiting for his opponent's error or a chance for a counter rather than going on the attack directly. But his tactical development added a very useful layer to this. It allowed him to control the pace of the match, angling it towards his advantage. This was most notable in his matches against Lee Chongwei. Lee Chong-wei was one of the fastest players to ever play. He was certainly faster than Momota. Lee Chong-wei was also incredibly good at being able to expose that difference in speed. Not many could take that away from him. Momota, though, was one of the few. And he did this through his great shot choice and fantastic shot quality, coupled with his improved physical. But whilst this style was effective for Momota, it earned him his numerous titles in 2018, including the World Championships, there were some drawbacks that became all too apparent by the end of the year. The sheer physical toll it took on Momota was simply not sustainable, and with the emergence of players like Anthony Ginting who made it very difficult to slow the game down against, it all meant that Momota would have to change. In Momota's eyes, he knew he had to add another layer to his game, in this instance developing his attack. He felt that if he could add more weighted attack and more speed changes into his game, then he would become more complete. In order to achieve this, Momota trained harder than he had ever trained before, as he knew this new style required an even greater physical capacity. On top of this, Momota also knew he had to be patient. Changing your game doesn't happen overnight, especially implementing it into tournament play. This became all too apparent in the early stages of 2019, as he lost in the first round of the Malaysia Masters, and then lost again in the final of the Indonesia Masters. Momota was trying to find his way with his new aggressive style, but it was clear that he needed more time and more practice. Not too much time and practice, he hoped, as come March, Momota was set to return to the All England for the first time in 3 years, and he had his eyes set on nothing but the title.
Still on the same principle, he's not opening up, he's just playing a little bit faster, but he's not opening up like this one. Yeah. Oh, God. Yeah.
Now that's the sort of smash and shot that Kadambi needs to be playing in the match. And this time, I have to say, was looking very good today.
This is physically so painful. Wide.
Kento Momota delivers again. The current world #1 and world champion into his first All England Open final, still yet to drop a game.
First up, the #1 seed from Japan, Kento Momota!
The world champion, Kento Momota. History is made. Kento Momota takes the All England title, the first player from Japan to win the men's singles title in the oldest and most prestigious annual international tournament.
This was a massive moment for Momota. The All England is one of badminton's biggest prizes. And not only that, but as has so often been the case in this video so far, Momota became the first Japanese men's singles player to win. Momota followed this up by retaining his Asia Championship title and then winning the Singapore Open. Now it would be easy for me to say that at this point Momota had cracked his new playing style. I mean, he had just won 3 back-to-back titles, with one of those, the All England, being one of the biggest in badminton. And on top of this, in his last 2 tournaments in the final, he had defeated the 2 players who had given him the most trouble at the end of 2018. But that would not be 100% correct, because not long after this there was a match that had Momota saying this.
練習に対する気持ちも強くなりましたし、そこから少しずつ、自分のプレーが変わってきたのかなと思います。
The entire Chinese team on their feet. This trophy beckons to China. China win an 11th Sudaman Cup title in their 13th consecutive final.
For Momota, this loss was devastating, crying for the first time after a defeat. But from this defeat, fueled by their frustrations, Momota decided he truly had to change. That loss ignited a fire in his belly to come back even stronger. It showed to him that he must get stronger physically, mentally, and also stronger within his new playing style. And oh boy, did it work.
And it's done it. Kento Momota. It's done it. It's gone wide and on his first opportunity. Kento. First time I'm asking. And he's done it. A second consecutive title for Kento Momota. He's done it. One of the most outstanding years in the history of our sport in the men's singles discipline for the man we're looking at. Yeah. Because his 11th title of the year. Dan talked about Lee Chong-wei and the years they've had. They haven't come close to this.
No, 11 tournaments or 11 wins in 1 year.
Following that Sudaman Cup loss, Kento Momota won 7 more titles. He retained his World Championship crown without dropping a game, concluding with the most one-sided final in World Championship history. And he also managed to claim the 2 titles that evaded him in 2018, the China Open and the World Tour Finals, both times defeating Anthony Ginting with matches only those two can have. 11 titles in 1 year, including the All England and another world title, plus finishing the year with over a 90% winning percentage for the year. You'd like to think that Kento Momota was satisfied, but he wasn't. And maybe he felt this way not just because he knew he had to keep pushing to stay ahead, but also because there was a huge tournament looming on the horizon.
しっかり結果を残すことができれば、自分の人生も変わってくると思いますし。
Struggling physically, but he has 9 match point opportunities. 11, the victory to the world #1 Kento Momota. He looked a class above Victor Axelsen.
I think we're going to see a Momota that can be compared to the 2008 Lin Dan, a player who plays significantly faster than everyone else.
Đâu ở đây vui chỗ cái tờ này đủ vinh giờ. Hawa cái lại đủ chẳng à.
On January 14th, 2020 at 4:30 in the morning, Kento Momota as well as a few other players were involved in a car crash as they travelled back to the airport. A crash that left Momota with a fractured nose and the driver sadly losing his life. Momota was rushed to the hospital and given the best possible care and a couple of days later returned to Japan. It was reported at the time that according to Japanese head coach Park Ji-bong, Momota would require at least 2 weeks of rest. This turned out to be a little unrealistic, as Momota wouldn't rejoin the national team training until 6 weeks later at the end of February. After such a crash, one in which the driver died, it was seen as an absolute miracle for him to be in one piece. It seemed everyone thought Momota would be back to normal in no time, and all seemed possible that he could return to competition at that year's All England. However, it was during that training camp when Momota rejoined his teammates that another issue arose, a far more sinister and concerning one.
実家に少しの間行ってチームに合流した時に、羽を打ったら、羽が二重に見えて、
羽が二重に？
はい。こう正面見た時は普通に見えるんですけど、こう眼球を動かしてこう上見た時に、球がこう2つ飛んできてるような感じで見えて。
It turned out that Kento Momota had suffered a orbital fracture, something which required surgery followed by 3 months rest and recovery. This completely flipped Momota's world upside down. One minute he was on top of the world, playing the sport he loved and seen as the heavy favourite for Olympic glory. The next he was hospitalised, unable to play any badminton, and his Olympic dream was hanging by a thread. Although the circumstances were completely different, it seemed like history was once again repeating itself. And then, if that wasn't enough, the lockdowns happened.
危機的な状況となっていることを踏まえ、政府として緊急事態宣言の準備をすべしとの意見をいただきました。
The lockdowns coming at this time affected Momota heavily, emotionally more than anything. Because on top of having this career-threatening injury, the uncertainty surrounding the Olympics and his participation, no tournaments for him to play, plus difficulty in being able to train properly, he was also away from his teammates. What should be rather obvious right now is Kento Momota absolutely loves team events. I mean, he puts the 2018 Thomas Cup silver above his 2018 World Championship gold. And Momota was also someone who loved giving back, whether to school kids or his local community. In fact, during the height of the pandemic, he decided to give away 10% of his 2019 prize money towards a fund fighting the pandemic. He donated 5 million yen to frontline doctors, nurses and first responders, and he also donated 200,000 masks to medical staff and students. Momota is incredibly sociable, so to suddenly be locked inside with no one around, combined with all the other stuff going on, well, needless to say, it was an incredibly trying time for him. However, there was one thing that came from the lockdown that gave Momota a glimmer of hope, a shred of something positive he could cling on to.
A highly influential member of the International Olympic Committee, that is the IOC, has confirmed that the Tokyo Olympics are set to be postponed by a year due to the coronavirus pandemic. The IOC had admitted...
The postponement of the Olympic Games gave Momota the time he needed to try and regain his strength and level. It was challenging. In training he was unable to train or play at full pace, and the lack of tournament play made motivation difficult at times, but Momota focused on doing his best every day, as well as trying to find fulfillment in the simple fact that at least he could play badminton. And with this, Momota pushed through and was even able to finish the year by winning the All Japan Championships for the 4th time, much to his surprise. Surprising as it may have been, this result had to have given Momota some hope. It certainly gave his fans hope, and with badminton set to return in Thailand in January, excitement was building for the return of the king, the return of King Kento.
そうですね、もうまさか自分が観戦するなんか思ってなかったので。
Just before the entire Japanese team were about to depart for the tournaments in Thailand, Kento Momota tested positive for COVID. Devastating news for Kento Momota, another setback he had to deal with. A setback that was hard physically, but more so mentally. Throughout the lockdown, Momota had found it so hard for motivation due to the lack of competition, and now he had a chance to compete and he couldn't. Add to that, he was the only member of the Japanese team to test positive, which ultimately led to the whole team having to withdraw. It's not like anyone blamed Momota, but I can imagine to him it felt that way. He would have felt like he had let his teammates down. Kento Momota's 2021 has not started positively, and with the Olympics looming and the number of tournaments and the build-up shrinking with every passing week, it would have been easy for Momota to slip even further. But it was at this point that Momota did something to turn it all around. He focused more attention on helping badminton grow and helping the next generation. One way Momota aimed to do this was through the very platform you are watching this video on, YouTube. As on February 1st, 2021, Kento Momota released his first video to his YouTube channel.
桃田健太です。今年は東京オリンピックがあると思うんですけど、そこでしっかり金メダルを取ってバドミントン界を盛り上げるのもそうなんですけど、もっともっと子供たちに夢を与えていけるように、頑張っていきたいなと思います。応援よろしくお願いします。
The goal for this channel was clear. He said as much in the description. In this first video, I've talked about why I've decided to start YouTube. I started YouTube with a big dream. I want to feel closer to my fans and supporters by sharing new sides of myself, not just as a badminton player, but also as the real Kento Momota. I also want to show my appreciation towards this amazing sport itself and everyone that has kindly supported me over the years. I hope my content brings hope to my viewers and children. And finally, I hope to make badminton a much more major sport. The style of this video and future videos was incredibly light-hearted and fun, something which must have been hard to do when you consider the stressful and uncertain time at which it was made. But creating videos like this, where he talked about playing with everyone at his Kento Momota arena, or future videos where he offered not just badminton tips but cooking tips too, were likely something that helped Momota. Help that he would end up needing, as 2021 turned out to be even more of a turbulent year than 2020. It started at the All England in March, his first tournament back. At that All England, Momota was defeated in the quarterfinals by Li Zijia, the player who went on to win the title. At the time, this result was seen as a little bit of a shock, but on reflection it really shouldn't have been. With all that had happened, the car crash, the orbital fracture, the surgery, the recovery, lockdown, contracting COVID, and the fact this was Momota's first tournament in 30 months, I think his performance reflected that. Even Momota himself knew his full fitness wasn't there and that he needed more time. But naturally, the press, media and fans were very quick to compare this current Momota to the old Momota. A comparison which would never cease. A comparison that as more time wore on, got to Momota. It was comparisons like that that really ramped up the pressure on Momota heading into the Tokyo Olympics. You can see it in his body language as he gave interviews. All questions were about the Olympics. Can you still win? Do you believe you can win? Questions to which Momota would often give differing answers.
東京オリンピック本当に金メダル、狙っていきたいなと思いました。
多分チャンピオンにはなれないと思うので、はい、100% 金メダルでよろしくお願いします。
オリンピックでメダル取るぞっていうのを全く思ってないですし。
できなくてもいいってことは金を取れなくてもってことですか？
そうですね。コートに立つことに意味があるみたいな意味があるかなと思って。
でも。
This photo, capturing this moment, is for me the saddest of Kento Momota's career. The sheer sadness, despair and disbelief in Momota's eyes is haunting, even more so when all of the context you have been given is added. It was at this moment I vividly remember thinking back to what Steen Pedersen said the day before Momota suffered that life-altering car crash.
I think we're going to see a Momota that can be compared to the 2008 Lin Dan, a player who plays significantly faster than everyone else.
And what makes it even more heartbreaking to look at now, with everything I've learned from researching this video, is that at this moment Kento Momota was probably thinking about everyone he had let down. It was directly after those Olympic Games that the what-ifs really started, with the main and rather obvious one being, what if Momota hadn't been in that car crash? It's a what-if that has followed him ever since, but at the time the vast majority of badminton fans and pundits felt that Momota could once again bounce back.
That's the way it goes sometimes. He would bounce back, I'm pretty sure.
Alongside this sentiment, the way in which he was going to do this was what Momota had said he needed: plenty more tournaments and chances to play. And he was about to get just that, as following the Olympics there was set to be a brutal schedule of tournaments, kicking off with his favourite type of tournament. You guessed it, a team tournament.
And that'll do it, 21-10 in that second game. The first was
really tight. The second, a lot more one-sided, but Momota had to be pretty close to his best. The fist pump tells you everything you need.
To say Kento Momota was nervous would be an understatement. He even admitted after his first match against England that he had some fears. Quite surprising when you consider his opponent in that match was ranked outside the top 150 in the world. However, even though this was his mindset as he started the tournament, as the tournaments progressed and he got more matches under his belt, he started to play better and better. And on top of this, it was clear that Momota was starting to enjoy himself. This momentum he built through both the Sudirman Cup and the Thomas Cup spilled over into the individual tournaments that followed. He reached the final of the Denmark Open, only just losing out to the Olympic champion Victor Axelsen. And then the following week at the French Open, he was once again cruising through rounds like the Momota of old. Momota was getting stronger and stronger with each passing match, and combined with the party-like atmosphere that comes with the French Open, you could feel this buzz surrounding Kento Momota. But then...
You want to retire? Yeah, he wants to retire.
He will not get any ranking points. He will not.
Yeah, I think they need to talk to him.
If you do not want treatment, then you need to reply. It's only it will. I'm not going to comment on that at this moment in time. So if you wish to play, you play. If you do not wish to play, then we stop now. Okay, he's going there.
Common sense prevailed.
Yeah.
Explaining the rules so that he understands, got to keep going. And in fact, I think the coach... Oh, he's quick.
They have decided between them. This is it.
Just as Kento Momota was building up some much needed momentum, misfortune struck him once more, this time a back injury. If that wasn't enough, because he was facing a player from his own country, if he withdrew he would lose all the points from the tournament. This is an incredibly outdated rule, one which had good intentions when introduced, but in situations like this it should have had an exception clause. What this meant for Momota was that once again he suffered a setback. However, only a few weeks later, in the first of 3 tournaments to be held in Bali, Momota showed no signs of a setback, as he won his first international title since that Malaysia Masters back in 2020.
Only needed the one. 21-17, 21-11, the margin of his victory.
But sadly for Momota, his misfortune would once again rear its ugly head and spoil any signs of positivity. The back injury he had suffered at the French Open came back, this time worse, which caused Momota to not just withdraw from the final tournament in Bali, but also withdraw from the World Championships to be held at the end of the year. 2021 in a lot of ways turned out to be worse than 2020, and that's saying something. Because in 2021 he had contracted COVID, had failed to deliver at his home Olympics, and now any little runs in momentum were being stopped dead in their tracks by injury. Momota must have felt like everything was against him, but sadly for him, 2022 wasn't about to treat him much better. The last 2 years for Momota had been incredibly testing, but throughout all of it, never once had Momota questioned his love for badminton. But by the end of 2022, even Momota would call that into question.
今はめちゃくちゃ苦しいですね。はい。なんか
The reason for this was just like in 2021, whenever Momota would seem to find a glimmer of hope, it was as if it was dashed a moment later. At the All England he scored a huge win over Hei Kwang-hee, the player who had beaten him at the Olympics, only for Momota to lose in a deciding game in the quarterfinals in such a one-sided manner, where it seemed like he couldn't reach any shots. Then at the Malaysia Open he reached a final, with some very good wins along the way. But this was crushed by the fact that in the final he was destroyed by Victor Axelsen. This was a player who just 2 years before Momota was regularly beating with ease. Now it seemed he couldn't even score a point. On their own, these 2 losses wouldn't be too bad. Yes, they were heavy losses, and at times Momota looked a little lost, but it was compounded by everything else on top, none more so than them being followed up by the inevitable comparisons to what he used to be. If all of this wasn't enough, something was to happen at the Thomas Cup that year that compounded this even further. In his match against Li Zijia, Kento Momota was convincingly beaten.
That will do. In just 45 minutes. What an astonishing scoreline.
But it was following that match that former Malaysian players Tan Boon Hong, Koo Kian Keat and Lee Chong Wei jumped on an Instagram live and said this.
Okey dah. Momota main macam mana? Macam tak tahu main ah? Dia punya raket tak ada string. Momota main macam mana? Komen sikit.
Walau weh. Macam mana dia balik loh.
Dia macam tak dapat cari itu feeling Tak, dia baru balik dari itu apa? Tempat sejuk, tangan dia keras. Dia tak ada rendam di tangan dia.
This clip went somewhat viral, and it resulted in a lot of heat coming the Malaysians' way, even prompting this response from Tan Boon Hong himself, a response he deleted not long after. Now, it is not known if Kento Momota actually saw this or heard about it, but I have a feeling he did. I say that because up until this point it is abundantly clear that Kento Momota looked up to Lee Chong Wei. I mean, the whole racket situation at the 2018 Worlds kinda proves that. But then, in an interview at the 2023 All England, Kento Momota was asked if he had an idol. This was his reply.
特にこの人っていうのはないですけど、やっぱりいろんな人のおかげで、こういうバドミントンが盛り上がっているので、みんなです。はい。
Now, maybe I am reaching a little bit, but it is quite compelling. And if Momota did hear about that Instagram live at the 2022 Thomas Cup, it must have been devastating for him. His confidence was already at rock bottom, and he had suffered a very hard loss for not just himself, but his nation too. And then to hear that it was mocked by a player he had always looked up to, well, that is like rubbing salt in a wound. Sadly for Momota, things didn't get much better, because at the World Championships, which were held in Tokyo, Kento Momota lost in the second round, a result which left the crowd in attendance stunned in silence.
Has landed in. Prannoy has put out the two-time former champion, Kento Momota. 21-7.
If failing to deliver on home soil once was bad enough, he did so for a second time the very next week, falling in the first round of the Japan Open. It was following this result in the Japan Open where Momota admitted that he had considered quitting badminton, saying he simply didn't enjoy it anymore. It was a feeling that had been eating at him for a while, with everything that had happened in the last year and before just brought it all out. You can see it in this interview, the pain in his eyes. It hurt him to admit this, because Momota always loved badminton, but now that love was being questioned. And sadly for Momota, things weren't going to get much better, as his old back injury flared up once more, forcing him to withdraw from all international tournaments for the remainder of 2022. Sadly for Momota, 2023 wasn't much different from the second half of 2022. Momota had a good run at the German Open, which prompted some excitement amongst fans, myself included, but following that was a string of first-round defeats, with reports that his back injury had returned. Following the Australian Open in August, the injuries simply became too much, and Momota decided to withdraw from a number of tournaments, with one of those being the Asian Games. This decision to withdraw from such an event, coupled with the fact that it was due to this back injury, one that was recurring over and over again, did prompt a lot of discussion about Momota, with most centred around whether or not he would ever come back to his best. This was not a new discussion. It had been a discussion that had been had ever since his car crash in 2020. There were those that thought he could, those that thought he couldn't, and there were those like me that felt he could, but he'll never be as dominant as before.
But just look at Momota now. It's he was different reasons, but it's really tough, and he was impossible to beat at that time before the accident, and then now he's human, and I'm sure he'll be at a stage where he can win tournaments again. It's pretty, but he's not gonna be supreme in that.
But with these constant setbacks, any slight momentum being killed quickly, it did start to make more and more people feel that Momota might never come back, at any sort of level.
Oh, great cross.
Hangs in there, Watanabe.
Still hanging in there. Amazing stuff. And that is out.
Brilliant work here. Kento Momota, 9 days short of 2 years since his last HSBC BWF World Tour title. And he has won the Career Masters, having lost to the Malaysia Open last year.
You can see how much that meant to him. He is pumping his fist till he's got that smile on his face, that golden smile.
You called it.
What stood out most about this Career Masters win was how happy Momota seemed on court. Yes, winning a title, especially your first in almost 2 years after the time you have been having, anyone would be smiling. But Momota seemed genuinely happy to be on court, something he noted in an interview after winning.
すごく嬉しいです。もう嬉しいだけですね。はい、それにつけ。
This win got the badminton community excited, as it was Momota's first international title since the Indonesia Masters at the end of 2021, almost 2 years before. But wait, I know what you're thinking. Based on what I've literally just said, maybe people shouldn't have been excited, as whenever Momota seemed to build a little bit of momentum before, it was quickly stopped, usually by injury. But whilst there were likely some with those doubts that this was the start of something special, when Momota followed this up with a great performance reaching the quarters at the Kumamoto Masters, and then ending the year with a 6th All Japan Championships, well then I think everyone was excused for thinking maybe, just maybe, Momota had turned a corner. Luck was finally on his side. On the outside, it seemed Momota had finished 2023 positively. A first tournament win in almost 2 years, backed up with another great showing, and then finishing the year with his 6th All Japan Championships. But it was after his win at the All Japan Championships that Momota admitted something that was cause for concern. His back injury was back once more. This would explain why in the early tournaments in 2024 we didn't see the Momota that had won the Korean Masters, losing in the qualifying at the Indonesia Masters and then not travelling to the remaining tournaments. But it was during this time, while still nursing that back injury, that Momota would once again show his fighting spirit. Whenever Momota played for a team, whether that was his NTT East team in the S&J League, or Japan at the Thomas Cup or Sudirman Cup, Momota was always capable of producing something special. And he did just that at those Asia Team Championships, as that win over Srikanth Kadambi meant Japan defeated the current Thomas Cup champions, India. It was no secret that Momota was still suffering that back injury, but in spite of all of that, and even trailing in that deciding match against Srikanth, he never gave up and fought until the end. There are those that looked at that match and saw Srikanth throwing it away rather than Momota winning it, which granted, I can see merit in, but for me this result wasn't about winning or losing. It was more that it showed Momota's determination and perseverance, that never give up attitude, something he had shown so much over the past few years. But everyone has their limits, and after withdrawing from numerous tournaments, on April 18th, 2024, Momota held a press conference where he made a huge announcement.
皆様、本日はお忙しい中お集まりいただきありがとうございます。代表を引退しようと決意しました。
So here we are, back where we began. But this is where I must admit that I left out quite a big part of Momota's retirement announcement. Let me play it for you in full.
皆様、本日はお忙しい中お集まりいただきありがとうございます。今月末の、トマス杯を最後に、日本代表引退を決意したこのタイミングで、自分の口から、感謝の気持ちを、伝えたいと思いこのような場を設けさせていただきました。本日はよろしくお願いします。
Yes, Kento Momota was set to retire after the Thomas Cup, which was fitting not just because Momota loves team events, but because there was a chance that he could end his career how he started it, by helping his nation win the Thomas Cup. This was Kento Momota's last dance, and everyone was excited to see it unfold.
They now have 8 match and tie points. And Malaysia are through to their first Thomas Cup semi-final since 2016.
Sadly for Japan and for his fans, it wasn't the fairy tale ending. Of course, it would have been really nice to have seen Japan lift the Thomas Cup once more, even more so had Momota played a pivotal role within it. But Momota still managed to go out on his own terms. He got to play 3 great matches, finishing undefeated, and he did it all playing with freedom and enjoyment, watched on by the people he held so dear, his teammates. Watching him play, you just couldn't help but smile, even though just beneath it all was a sad undertone that the career of such a player was coming to an end. As I watched Momota play at the Thomas Cup, I couldn't help but be reminded of an interview I had watched of him from a few years previous. In that interview, he was asked about being compared to legends like Lifechanging or Lin Dan. Momota, respectfully as always, said that he simply couldn't be held in the same regard, with one of the main reasons being that whenever Lin Dan or Lifechanging entered an arena, everyone cheered loudly. Well, after what I saw in his final matches, I don't think he could deny his legendary status now.
I'm not sure they will use him with 3 other higher ranked players.
I think we're going to see a Momota that can be compared to the 2008 Lin Dan, a player who plays significantly faster than everyone else.
That comment by commentator Steen Pedersen at the time felt somewhat insignificant. It was a passing comment by a former head coach and commentator of many years, passing judgment. And that's all it should have been. But now, in retrospect, it's haunting. As less than 24 hours later, Kento Momota would go from being a player who could have potentially matched a player like Lin Dan, possibly even surpassed him, to a player who would go on to struggle to win matches, lose all confidence, and ultimately end his career tragically short. Before making this video, I have always been struck by the what-ifs of Momota's career. Whenever I found myself thinking about it, I would get sad. The whole situation just didn't seem fair. And as I set out to make this video, trying to watch as many Momota matches and interviews as possible, and read as many articles as I could, that feeling was compounded. When watching his interviews from before his accident alongside interviews from after his accident, the difference is stark. Momota would still answer in his calm, composed fashion, very thoughtful in giving his answers, but whereas before he had a glow about him, a happiness, this was replaced by deep sadness. With the whole picture laid out in front of me, his whole career, all of the ups and downs, coupled with some of the gaps filled in by Momota himself during his retirement announcement, such as the fact that his eyesight was worse than he had ever let on, that his body simply couldn't recover, and that just everything was hard for him following the crash. Well, then watching those interviews back, it was clear that Momota was dealing with a lot more than he ever let on. Despite all of this, the physical pain and mental anguish, Momota continued because he loved badminton. Ironic as it is a love which must have caused him the most discomfort at times. But on top of this, Momota continued because of all the support he got from everyone, his family, his teammates, his fans and his community. Kento Momota wishes to be remembered for being himself, to be remembered as Kento Momota. But to us, the badminton fans, he will also be remembered for his amazing badminton skills, the titles and accolades he won, the achievements he achieved, and also the kind of person he was off court. Humble, gracious and down to earth. Of course, whenever talking about Kento Momota, it's inevitable that those what-ifs will come up. But whilst it's impossible to not have those what ifs, I want to end this video on the what weres and what will be's. Momota was a fantastic player who dominated men's singles for 2 straight years. Momota was a double world champion, an All England champion, and still holds the record for the most titles in a year. Momota always put others first, always played for a bigger purpose, whether that be his fans, his community, his school, his family or his teammates. Momota was always humble and gracious. Momota was, is and forever will be an inspiration to many badminton players, not just Japanese. And above all else, I have a feeling Momota will be happy in the next chapter of his life.
今はもう、はい、何のストレスもなく生活できてます。
Happy retirement, Kento. I look forward to playing you in the Kento Momota arena someday.
もしなった場合はそういうこともしていきたいなと思います。